What's the worst thing someone tried to correct you about something you're specialized at? Viewer edition. Story 1. I grew up in Germany and lived there for 10 years, so obviously I learned to speak German. It's one of my first languages, and I am fluent in it. Well, a few years ago, me and my family moved back to Ireland since most of our family lives here. I started secondary school, and I had to choose a language to study. Obviously, I chose German since I'm already fluent, and it would get me easy points in the Leaving Cert. Well, my German teacher was an absolute B. She was rude and disrespectful towards everyone in the class constantly, and the worst part was that she couldn't even speak proper German. I know there's different dialects and accents, but this woman would absolutely butcher pronunciations and skip words or get them jumbled up. I didn't tell her I spoke German at first, and she once tried to correct me. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "I don't know how y'all say it in Ireland, but that's how we pronounce it in Germany." She looked at me in shock and said, "Oh, so you've been to Germany before?" as if trying to catch me out. I just replied, "Yeah, I lived there for 10 years. Never tried to correct me again after that." All I can imagine when I'm thinking of this teacher in my head is this woman coming in and being like, "Guten Tag, class. Ich heiße Peggy Hale." I mean, if that's not who she was, don't tell me. I need to believe this. Story 2. Was in 6th grade, had an uncle who was left-handed and told me only 10% of people are left-handed. Repeated this in class to a few friends, one of whom was left-handed, and he confirmed he'd heard that number too. Teacher overheard and told us we were wrong, that it was 50%, and demonstrated it by asking the left-handed kids to raise their hands. Out of 30 kids, only 2 raised their hands. He insisted the sample size just wasn't big enough. Teachers, learn to just admit when you're wrong. I don't know why I'm singing, but maybe this song will teach you humility, which will help you connect with the kiddies. Story 3. I was diagnosed with celiac as a baby back in the 70s when nobody knew what celiac or gluten-free was. Basically spent my entire childhood explaining to adults, no, I can't eat that. Yes, it does have gluten in it. Yes, I'm sure. As you might imagine, I was a lot of fun at all the birthday parties with pizza and cake. Thankfully, the recent gluten-free fad means most people are aware of it now. Story 4. I had a history teacher in 8th grade ask us, "What does AD stand for?" I raised my hand, he called on me, and I said, "Anno Domini," to which he responded, "Well, tell us what it actually stands for." I repeated myself, and then he told the whole class it actually stood for after death. Someone in the class looked up what the proper meaning was, and to the teacher's surprise, I was right. The teacher didn't call on me in class for at least a month. Story 5. I remember a woman told me I was wrong about my own scar and medical condition. I was born with gastroschisis, a condition where my stomach wasn't fully developed and so my guts were just hanging out. She claimed that doesn't exist and I actually got my scar from the doctors when they cut me open giving my mom a C-section. Let me preface by saying I was not talking to this woman. I was talking on the phone to a friend quietly in the waiting room for my yearly physical. I told my friend I'd call her back and told this woman that she was absolutely delusional and that I didn't ask for her effing opinion. Still the most jaw-dropping interaction of my entire life. Look, I'm sorry, but complete strangers without any sort of real medical training or specialization in certain fields are way smarter about your medical conditions than you or the doctors who have told you all the information that you know. It's so obvious. Story 6. My father is a tattoo artist and is teaching me. He was cleaning up his station after a client's tattoo, and I swear to God, the person they came with to also get a tattoo had the audacity to ask, "You could have just used the same needle and ink for both of us." I had to just sit there and stare at this person for a moment. My dad glanced at me, then explained that no, you can't use the same needle and ink for 2 different people. I had to rub my eyes because the statement hurt my brain. Story 7. Someone told my mom it was her fault getting vaccinations that led to my autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. I had to do the research and just look at family history to prove to her she did nothing wrong and what I had was a genetic condition, most likely from my dad who got it from his mom. Me and Grandma were so much alike. She still feels bad she didn't know about it. I tell her nobody really knew about it and some people still don't. Story 8. I have spent near 2 decades studying history, theology, ancient literature, and mythology. About 10 years ago, when I'd only been studying it for a whole decade, my brother, who has not studied those things, got into a long, protracted argument with me about what Ragnarok was in Norse mythology. Basically, he asked me if I knew what Ragnarok was, and I offhandedly said, sure, it's the end of the world in Norse mythology. Why? And he started laughing and calling me a buffoon for getting it wrong. He was convinced it was the name of a dragon in the Norse mythos instead. I googled it and showed him the definition of Ragnarok on my phone, and he started exclaiming over and over that it was also the name of a dragon. I told him no, that there are only 3 named possibly dragons in Norse mythology, and those were Jormungandr, Njörgr, and Fafnir. He got really mad and started yelling that Ragnarok was also the name of a dragon some more, to which I asked, have you read the Eddas at all? Because I have, a few times. He stormed off after that. I found out later that he decided that Ragnarok must be the name of a dragon because there's a vaguely dragon-shaped airship named Ragnarok in Final Fantasy VIII. Apparently, a 20-year-old video game has more authority on the subject than the guy who's actually read and studied the books. And, oh yes, we were adults at the time. While he was tantruming and screaming over and over again that Ragnarok was a dragon, he was in his mid to late 20s, married, and had a kid on the way. Look, I know that I got probably some of those Norse pronunciations wrong. I feel like I got Jormungandr right, Njörgr, and Fafnir. Maybe, maybe not. Roll of the dice. I tried to look some of them up, and then I tried to remember them as I was reading it, and you know what? We landed where we landed, but at least I feel like I got Ragnarok right, so, there's that. Also, I remember Ragnarok in Final Fantasy VIII. That game was weird. Story 9. As a Titterpig game master with 6+ years of experience and overall really positive player feedback, it was pretty funny when one guy running his first half-butted improv campaign tried to advise me on various aspects of running a campaign. Mostly to the toxic tune of, you need to be more in control. The campaign is your stories that the players are experiencing. Players will ruin your campaign story if you don't enforce strict limits. You need to have in-game penalties if someone's late from a game or misses a game, etc. The guy also regularly nitpicked and whined about Matt Mercer and Matt Colville as if he held some seniority over those two absolutely lovable titans of the field. His campaign slowly imploded as his players moved over to my various campaigns one by one as they got fed up with his bad behavior and story vision railroading. Good times. My dear commenter, as a game master of 20+ years experience, let me say I 100% agree with you, and this friend of yours sounds like a couple game masters that I've had to play with, and it's not great. You could always check out my channel, The Dungeon Noobs Guy, to find out more about my game playing stuff, but, I'm sure you all probably know about that. Story 10. I'm a huge herpetology enthusiast and have been raising and rescuing reptiles for almost 20 years now. My husband once tried to mansplain to me how to take care of my own lizards. I just stared at him with this big blank smile on my face until he realized what he did. Story 11. I have the exact opposite of Norway's flat story. I live in Finland, and someone argued with me that we must have beautiful mountains because Norway has a lot of them and the Nordics are all basically the same. I also get people arguing with me a lot when I say I'm not Scandinavian, I'm Finnish. Usually creepy guys being like, Scandinavian girls are so hot, etc., etc. Well, hope you find one since I'm not Scandinavian because Finland is not in Scandinavia any more than Iceland. Story 12. I once did a report on the state of Alaska in grade school. My second cousin, who's younger than me and was at a lower grade level than me, tried to tell me that Alaska is frozen all the time, even in the summer. Now, I don't remember too much about what I researched, but what I do remember is that in the summer, the sun never fully sets and is even referred to as the land of the midnight sun, which of course is not very ice-friendly. She didn't believe me when I told her that, even though I'm the one who was assigned to report and did the research. Look, when it comes to places that aren't where I live, I only learn the broadest of stereotypes about them, and that's just the way it is. If I go to, Norway, it's full of Vikings. If I go to Alaska, it's got ice and polar bears. If I go to, I would make a joke, but a lot of them I feel like might be pretty insensitive, so we're just going to leave it at that. Folks, learn about other countries and states. Story 13. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2012. When explaining to someone that my MS causes me to be immunocompromised, they tried to argue with me. Apparently, the fact that their aunt has MS means they know more about it than me, someone who actually has it. Their argument? It has something to do with the brain. And that was it. That's all they knew about MS, and they thought it was more than what I know about an incurable illness I've had for over a decade. They weren't interested in hearing my response. They really thought that they just owned me with their knowledge. It does pertain to the brain, but that doesn't negate how it compromises the immune system. Story 14. When I was younger, there was this other girl that loved animals just as much as I did. We were pretty close, in fact, and she knew quite a lot for someone our age. But I am a child on the spectrum whose special interest is the entirety of the animal kingdom, and I had been reading books about zoology and animal classification since I was 9. I'm 14 now, by the way. For some reason that day we were on the topic of flamingos. We were in year 6, by the way, so around 10 or 11, though we both had iPhones. She had tried to tell me that flamingos cannot fly. As a child, I hated unnecessary human interaction for obvious reasons, especially if I could have been in the wrong, but I knew that I was completely and entirely correct, so I confidently went up to the teacher, expecting her to take my side, and instead she also informed me that flamingos can't fly. Went home that day slightly upset and searched it up to double check. Turns out flamingos can in fact fly, though regrettably I never brung it up again and corrected the two. Story 15. Dated a girl once that insisted the way to get rid of backlighting in a photo was to turn on lights behind the subject and have no lights in front of them. She was livid when I let her take the photos and they turned out backlit. It was the camera's fault. The lights were the wrong kind. Everyone in the photo was standing wrong. I retook the photos with the correct lighting. She later recalled the story that she had to step in because I was backlighting everything. She also claimed my photo as the one she took. Story 16. I was a theology major in college, and though I never finished my degree, I am a scholar. I read my Bible daily and listened to it all the way through 2 to 3 times a year in multiple versions, plus read multiple books and research papers regularly on the topic. I've also consumed a considerable amount of content on parallel subjects such as contemporary religions and history. I am familiar with both biblical Hebrew and Koine Greek. Outside of someone with a doctorate or two, I am the expert on anything biblical. Yet many people over the age of 50 doggedly argue with me that cleanliness is next to godliness is a scripture in the Bible. They can't quote chapter and verse, but they swear it's there. It is not. I don't need all of my years of study to refute this. Google takes 2 seconds. Please use it. I feel like you could fill this entire video with things that people swear are in the Bible that aren't in the Bible. And in fact, dear commenter, I encourage you to bless us with more of these little facts, because I know a number of them, but without stopping to look and confirm and check sources to be absolutely certain, that would just take too long. But it's pretty wild what people think is in the Bible and really isn't. Story 17. I work as an escape room game master, and I cannot tell you how many times I've heard, "We already did that," and they had not done it. Imagine you're watching a group play a game that you have completely memorized, run hundreds of times, and reset just as many times. You see this group start to do a puzzle, but get distracted or find it too hard and give up. A few minutes later, they ask for your help. You ask them if they have done that puzzle, and they have. You know that it's not true, but you ask them if they have, insert item here, anyway, just to make sure. They say they have not. You tell them to look inside the box, the code from the puzzle unlocked. They say the box is locked. You again tell them to do the puzzle. They say they already did. You look at the camera. They still had not done the puzzle. Welcome to the cyclical life of a game master. No, this is semi-rare, but over the years, the numbers rack up. Also, I know it's not their fault. Their brains are just overloaded. Story 18. During my university years as a psychology major, I met a man on a train who gave me the psychology doesn't work story. I was too non-confrontational at the time to even think of disagreeing, but honestly, after he then went on a tangent adding how modern medicine is over, now we should all completely switch to alternative, and how planes drop chemicals over cities, I don't think I could have convinced him anyway. Story 19. Mental health. I have a couple of different issues that tie together and had a psychiatrist straight up tell me in our first meeting after reading my history that one of them doesn't exist, so I'm going to treat you for a condition I do not have. I calmly walked to her bookshelf, pulled out the current DSM, opened it to the correct page, and said, "There you go. I don't think this relationship is going to work out." Walked out the door and never went back. All told, our session lasted 15 minutes.
Hey folks, this is a quick reminder that just because someone is a therapist doesn't mean that they are right and doesn't mean you have to stick with them. If you're trying to get a new therapist and they don't feel like a good fit, or they seem to dismiss things about you without getting to know you first, you're justified in finding a new therapist.
Story 20. I found this one so relatable. Currently in my first year of college for an art program. Specifically, we do a lot of simple pencil drawing. And one week we were doing what I consider to be middle school level 1-point perspective drawing. In fact, I drew a city using the 1-point perspective trick in middle school. This was college, and we were drawing, quote, boxes. I wanted to clarify if boxes meant strictly cubes, or if we could also draw rectangles. My instructor, the doll she is, said, "Okay, so it's about following instructions, right? Good." Very condescendingly. Never a good thing when you start getting snarky with a professor that you're going to be stuck with for the next 2 years, but that stuff is starting to make my blood boil. Story 21. I'm hardly a specialist at this, but I remember on a YouTube chat someone asked why English and Welsh sound so different when the countries are next to each other. I told them it's because they belong to different language families, Welsh being Celtic and English being Germanic. The guy said he didn't think that sounded right, so he decided it wasn't, despite other people in the chat chiming in to tell him I was right. He then decided to look up what language family German belongs to, and then said because German is a Germanic language, which it is, it meant English wasn't a Germanic language. When I reiterated my point and said that Celtic language of England would be the now dead language of Brittonic, he said I was just making stuff up. Guy just didn't seem to like the answer to his own question. Story 22. My aunt's husband is the type of guy who knows everything about everything and definitely always knows more than you. Anyway, we were at a family gathering and I was explaining to my grandmother about a medication that I'm on for a rare disorder. He cut in to tell me that my doctor was an idiot for prescribing it and how I would definitely be taking a different med because that's what helped him with a completely different medical issue. I calmly reminded for the 4th time that not only have I been dealing with this issue for over 20 years, but that I'm also licensed in pharmacy. It was literally what I did for a living. He got offended that I wasn't profusely thanking him for this gem of medical insight into a disorder that he thinks is primarily all in my head. For context, I have an autoimmune disease that is destroying my vascular system, and I've already been hospitalized nearly a dozen times with massive DVTs.
Folks, there's too many of these stories. You gotta stop thinking that you know everything about someone's medical condition because something you've dealt with medically is maybe sort of related. I feel like it's more complicated than that, or at the very least, the amount of schooling doctors need would indicate as such.
Story 23. As someone who loves Greek mythology, I find it amazing every single time I'm told that Heracles is actually called Hercules. Hercules is the Roman version of Heracles. Heracles was specifically named after Zeus's wife, Hera, so that Hera wouldn't get mad about the fact that Heracles wasn't her son. Heracles' original name before the name changing was Aclaeus, by the way. Edit. I forgot to mention that one of the people who have corrected me was my history teacher. What the hell? Story 24. I used to have a coworker who thought he knew so much about welding because he used to work in an assembly line style factory that built exercise equipment while I was going to school studying welding. Let me be clear, he only touched a MIG machine a handful of times and only monitored the machines doing the welding. When I asked him if he could run a bead, he straight up admitted that he couldn't and his welds looked like crap. He kept telling me I don't need to go to school for welding because it's not rocket science. I tried to explain to him that no, it's not rocket science, but it's not incredibly easy to learn either. You can teach yourself welding, it's not at all impossible, but you'll learn more by taking a class or course. At the time, I knew only so much about welding, but was so fed up with his crap that I asked him, do you know how to run a rip pass on an inch-thick pipe using 60-10 rod? Now, anybody who knows how to weld pipe will probably be able to tell you that I know very little about pipe welding. I've never welded pipe, but was so fed up I figured I'd throw some terms at this dunce that he wouldn't understand, hoping I would prove a point. I didn't prove my point, because he was, as previously stated, a dunce and an egotistical douche. That still pees me off to this day, and while I still can't weld pipe, I have multiple certificates for different welding processes in different positions and have and can probably still weld, at least to some basic extent, using almost every single welding process, not counting a few niche ones. I hate that guy. Story 25. I have debilitating OCD and used to compulsively spend entire days researching the same topics over and over. There's one disease that everybody has wildly different ideas about that I have a horrifying amount of research memorized on: salmonellosis. My theory is that people are especially argumentative over it because it's common, so everyone has heard of it, and salmonella bacteria is highly present in a lot of our most beloved foods like chicken, lettuce, and eggs. People dislike being educated on it because it's a horrible disease and they want to continue enjoying their foods the way they always have without having to worry. Boy, do people not like to hear facts about salmonellosis. Yes, salmonella is present inside of the egg. Yes, eggshells can harbor salmonella even after pasteurization. Yes, washing chicken under running water drastically increases your risk of contamination. Story 26. Formerly worked tech support for Apple. Don't worry, the NDA expired a while ago. My own sister tried to argue with me that some feature of iOS, I can't remember which one, was brand new. That feature came out in iOS 10. I should know, they forced us to sit and watch the keynote when it came out. She said that I must be wrong, just like I am about everything with her, because she's been using Apple products since she finished high school. I'm sitting there thinking about how my whole goddamn job was proof that just because you use something for a long time doesn't mean you know what the F you're doing.
I mean, to be fair, one could argue that just about every feature Apple ever seems to come up with isn't new because someone else has done it before for a quarter of the price. Sorry, had to give a little dig to Apple in there, but they're fine. You're fine if you use Apple. I'm kidding.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.